à la réunion numéro 15 du
Welcome to the 15th meeting of the Veteran Affairs Committee. I would like to welcome our guests. A motion was adopted on February 8th, 2022, and the committee is meeting in order to continue our research on the funding of pensions.
Shots or taking photos of your screen is not permitted. If you are on the video conference, please click on the microphone icon to unmute yourself. Those in the room, your microphone will be controlled as normal by the proceedings and verification officer. When speaking, please speak slowly and clearly. And when you are not speaking, your mic should be on mute. A reminder that all comments by members and witnesses should be addressed to the chair. J'aimerais maintenant souhaiter la
I would like to welcome our witnesses.
Military and Veterans Health Research. Nous avons Dr. Eric Peng-Hong Lee.
We have Dr. Eric Peng-Hong Lee, the Associate Professor of the University of British Columbia.
First, we have Crystal Garrett-Bird, Director General Policy and Research. And from the Treasury Board Secretariat, we have Nadine Labrie, Senior Director, Pensions and Benefits. Simon Crabtree, Executive Director, Pensions and Benefits. And finally, from Department of National Defense, we have Brigadier General Virginia Tettersall, Directeur Général, Compensation and Benefits. You will have 5 minutes for your opening remarks, and we will then go into rounds of questioning. I was informed that the Treasury Board Secretariat do not have opening remarks, and they will only answer questions from the members. We will begin with Dr. Eric Lee, and then we will move on to the Department of Veterans Affairs, and finally to the Department of National Defense. So, je voudrais inviter les participants, d'abord, Monsieur.
I would like to invite Mr. Lee to speak. I will wave the yellow card when there's 1 minute left and red card when your time is up.
His mic and to start for his opening remarks for 5 minutes. Please go ahead, Mr. Lee.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, committee members, and honorable guests. This is my honor to be here today to join the meeting. So I'm Eric Lee, Associate Professor at the Faculty of Management of UBC Okanagan campus. I would like to share the opportunity or the key findings and recommendations based on qualitative studies of financial well-being for military veterans survivors funded by the Canadian Institute for Military and Veterans Health Research. The well-being of military veteran survivors is insufficiently understood, raising concerns regarding the inabilities of spouses who marry or enter into common law relationships with the veterans after he or she turns 60 to access the superannuation's benefit. To better understand the scale of this issue, between the month of March and October of 2020, we interviewed 7 survivors and 3 veterans. Even though the participant pool is relatively small, these 10 interviews were sufficient for our research team to capture 4 themes related to the changes in financial well-being, survivors' adjustment and compromise in lifestyle, concerns about home ownership, financial stability and independence, and their views on current pensions policies. Our findings indicate that being ineligible inherit veterans' pensions make a very large differences to their lives of survivors. The participants who do not receive the veterans' pensions had to make some drastic changes to their lifestyle. For example, one participant had to sell her townhouse after her husband died to reduce her expenditure. And she now has to be very careful with her expenses. For instance, for that also limited her opportunities for socializations, leading to loneliness and depression. Some irregular and unexpected expenses, such as prescription glasses, home repairs or renovations or car maintenance, can cause extra stress for these night survivors. Many also worry about their futures as they anticipate their health-related costs will increase as they're aging. So struggles are even greater for those who are not eligible for veterans' pensions, and most military spouses are unable to sustain full-time employment and have limited personal incomes and savings. Based on our findings, we offer 3 recommendations for policy and program review. First, to ensure the surviving partners of military veterans who have also made many personal sacrifices are recognized for their partnership with our veterans. The government of Canada should consider removing the age limitations on pension inheritance. So second, the Canadian government's programs and service operators should also review and streamline the communication platform to ensure ease of access to all program benefit privilege entitlements and associated eligibilities criteria. And also in our studies, we also recognize the peer support should be recognized and enabled to enhance support groups on other veterans or survivors to use social media or other communication platforms to support each other. So third, survivors who enter into a relationship with a veteran late in life feel psychologically strained due to various social stigmas. For instance, many of our participants mentioned that they're being labeled as gold diggers, which is unfair to these particular populations. So for those who receive benefits from their husband's death in service, also feel guilty about kind of getting money. These and other issues remain unaddressed as they are not provided counseling. Thus, social workers and psychologists should be made available to both veterans and their survivors. In summary, our study showcased the struggles and challenges veterans and their surviving spouses facing. It's particularly noteworthy that survivors who married into the veterans after his or her 60th birthdays suffers the most, as the substantial cut in their income due to the loss of military pensions forced them to change their lifestyle considerably. Veterans who start a relationship after the age of 60 also concur that the current policy on pension inheritance create uncertainty for their partners. To end my presentations today, I would like to share 2 quotes from my research participants. So one survivor told us, "My late husband was in the military for 32 years. He literally gave his life for the country. Now the legislation states that age 60, you no longer are going to be interested in getting married. At age 60, you are too old to have a relationship anymore. And in normal circumstances, you could still have another 20 years with a partner. We do have concerns that the government really needs to look at that."
Mr. Lee, could you conclude, please, in 10 seconds, please?
Okay, sure. Yeah. Just like the other veterans is just mentioned that protect me and I have you, fair is fair. If I'm willing to stand in front of a Buddhist for you, why you have allowed all these people, including yourself, to take shot at me when I'm disabled and seniors? Thank you for having me today. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lee. And now I'd like to invite from the Department of Veteran Affairs, Mrs. Crystal Garrett-Bird, Director General Policy and Research, for 5 minutes, please.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. Thank you for the invitation to be with you today. I would like to begin by acknowledging that the land I am speaking with you from is the traditional and unceded territory of the Abigwit Mi'kmaq First Nation. I welcome this opportunity to speak with you about the concerns of veterans who marry after the age of 60 and their spouses and survivors. We are happy to engage in this very important discussion.
First, I would like to present the services and benefits that are currently offered by Veterans Affairs Canada to support the survivors according to 2 laws, the Benefits Act and the Well-Being of Veterans Act.
Only through a disability benefit survivor's pension. This is entirely unrelated to superannuation. Payments may also be made through the income replacement benefit, and additional compensation may be paid if the veteran's passing was service-related. Some low-income survivors may also be eligible for financial support through the War Veterans Allowance or the Canadian Forces Income Support Program. In addition, survivors are eligible for the Veterans Emergency Fund, which provides financial assistance in the event of urgent and unexpected situations. Finally, surviving primary caregivers of veterans may be eligible to receive Veterans Independence Program housekeeping and grounds maintenance, provided that the veteran was in receipt of the service at the time of their passing.
In the 2019 budget, the Government of Canada committed to invest $150 million over 5 years to establish a fund for survivors. This would serve to support veterans who married after they turned 60, as well as their spouses, and in order to ensure that the survivors have the financial support that they need.
It is important to note that this fund does not change the Marriage After 60 clause in the Canadian Forces Superannuation Act. This act is under the responsibility of the Department of National Defence. After the Veterans Survivors Fund was announced, we recognized we needed information about these survivors' needs and the magnitude of the issue. This is because the only administrative data we knew with absolute certainty was the number of veterans who select the optional survivor benefit. À cette fin, nous avons collaboré avec Statistique Canada.
To this end, we have collaborated with Statistics Canada and Canadian Institute for Military and Veteran Health Research in order to determine the size and the characteristics of the population of survivors.
However, we have since received the results of this research and learned the following about living survivors. There were an estimated 4,500 people who entered into a marriage or common law relationship with a veteran after the veteran's 60th birthday. In each of these cases, the veteran was a Canadian Armed Forces superannuate. Virtually all were female, and 90% were age 70 or older. Most had higher incomes compared to other Canadian females in the same age group. Their median income was $34,900 versus $25,600. And finally, over 1,200 survivors, or 27%, were in receipt of the Guaranteed Income Supplement, and approximately 850 of the 4,500 living survivors, or 19%, had incomes below the low-income measure, which was $24,890 before tax. On this last point, we should consider the Budget 2021 commitment to implement a 10% increase to the Old Age Security Program for those 75 years and older. This increase starts in July 2022, and with this enhancement, it is anticipated that about 250 of the estimated 4,500 living survivors will have incomes below the low-income measure. Now, let me be clear, we do not see this as an insignificant number, and we realize it's not just about money. It is also about recognition.
The needs of survivors are important to us, and that is why we offer them benefits and support programs like those I've mentioned.
To best inform how to move forward with the Veterans Survivors Fund.
I will end by saying that Veterans Affairs Canada recognizes that spouses and common law spouses of veterans play a crucial role in the care given to our veterans.
Survivors have the support they need. Thank you et merci.
Thank you so much, Mrs. Garrett Bird, for your opening remarks. And now I'd like to invite from the Department of National Defense, the Brigadier General Virginia Tattersall, Director General Compensation and Benefits. Please go ahead for 5 minutes, please.
Bon après-midi, Monsieur le Chair et membres du committee. Comme stated.
Good afternoon. I am the Brigadier General Virginia Tattersall. I am the President of an organization. Mr. Chair, thank you for your invitation today.
Compensation and benefits for the Canadian Armed Forces is a topic of great importance. My responsibilities in the area of Canadian Armed Forces compensation and benefits include the policy management and service delivery administration for everything from military pay and allowances to release benefits and military pensions. You have just heard from my colleague at Veterans Affairs Canada, and I would like to take this opportunity to outline the role of national defence in regards to the Canadian Forces Superannuation Act. The Minister of National Defence, under the Canadian Forces Superannuation Act, is responsible for the overall management of the pension plan, including the financial management of Canadian Armed Forces pension funds. My organization is responsible for the oversight of the pension plan, contribution calculations, financial analysis, program advice, and interpretation and preparation of the annual reports, all in support of the minister's role. We also conduct and contribute to the analysis, design, and policy of the pension programs, including working alongside the Department of Justice and Treasury Board when analysis is required for any changes or amendments to the Canadian Armed Forces Superannuation Act. Je suis heureux de prendre vos questions à ce temps. Thank you for inviting me.
I'm ready for any questions.
Madame Trotol et maintenant.
Thank you, and now we will pass to the question period. I will ask members to specify who they are asking the question to, and for the witnesses, open your mic when the question is asked to you as soon as it is asked. I ask Mrs. Kathy Rogenthal for the six coming minutes. The mic is yours.
Thank you very much, Chair. And thank you all for being here today. We do appreciate you participating in this issue, as I'm sure you're aware, has a great deal of emotion attached to it. And you do recognize that, and I appreciate that we have to consider that in the midst of all of this. Dr. Lee, I have a couple of questions, first of all, for you. When you mentioned the number who were engaged in the study, and you gave the reasoning why there weren't more, you did mention the impacts of COVID. Now, you did mention, the inability to meet. I know our legions have a significant role in bringing people together. I wonder, was there an effort to engage the Legion to assist people to be able to take part in this via Zoom? I'm assuming maybe a lot of the older individuals weren't familiar with those sources of communication. Was that something that was considered and attempted to any great degree?
We did send a couple hundred emails to all the legions across the country. And we sent probably around 500 emails, invitations to different churches and religious groups because we believe that would be the vehicle. But a little bit unfortunate because it's the beginning of the COVID hit. And there's no response. They didn't really have a lot of gathering. They canceled pretty much all the in-person. And we talked to a few legions and leaders, but that they come back to us, but that we don't have any lunches. And that's the way to really engaging those people and hopefully to seek out. And turn out I use quite a lot of personal networks to kind of get those numbers. Yeah. Okay. Thank you for the questions. Yeah.
Yes. No, thank you. That is disconcerting to me to realize that there wasn't, a significant effort on the part of VAC to work with the legions to make it happen, to have more individuals engaged in this process. But I appreciate that response from you. Thank you. I see your recommendations here, and you do talk about information provision technology should be improved. Is that part of the picture here that you gained because of interaction with those you were able to talk to, but also possibly in regard to expectations to be able to perform the task that you were given?
Well, I think it's more like the way how to support the survivors navigating those benefit and program which is can serve them. Okay. And because when I talk to the survivor for that, they just have difficulty because it's a double hit for them because it's a financial struggle because they lost their pensions, and then and also they lost their spouse at the same time. They really kind of spend months to figuring out what to do and how to do. I think having said this, the information and communication platform is crucial.
Understood, yes. So obviously, as if they're not going through enough already, they just don't have the capability to communicate in the way that would be needed, in which case it would be good if we somehow had back available to be proactive in communicating with them on that, in that regard. So you do mention the issues around psychological support for veterans and their survivors in this circumstance. We did hear about one veteran who did make that decision to offset some of his pension for the future in the case of his wife needing that support. So they made those sacrifices for him to be able to do that. And then she passed away ahead of him, and those funds were no longer his. Did you face that conversation at all? And what was your sense of the psychological and emotional stress that would bring?
Well, I would say that my data didn't really come directly to those conversations with that, but we do have veterans is really worried about okay, if he's passed away before kind of his partners with that, and he really hope his partner can inherit the funds or the properties or the assets he got, right. but didn't really come to the conversations about and what if his partner is passed before. Kind of a step with that.
Right. Yeah. I would like to ask, I'm not sure which of the women who presented would best give this answer. When that decision is made by a veteran, are they counseled in the fact that when they make that sacrifice and put that money aside, and if their spouse was to die, that those funds would no longer be available? Because I would think that they would say, okay, then let's invest this personally rather than lose that as a possible means of income. I don't know, Ms. Garrett-Baird or Ms. Tattersall? Are you hearing me?
Yes, I am.
Okay, thank you.
I will jump in to provide a response. So just to be clear with respect to when an optional survivor benefit is established. So the actual funds that are now taken by the annuitant making that decision never actually leave the pension fund. So it's not like in a divorce where you would receive in the division of assets a check for an amount of money. While there is a reduction of payments to the annuitant, those funds are still in the pension fund, which means that in the event of the death of a spouse, you may revoke the optional survivor benefit, and therefore the pension amount that is received by the annuitant goes back to 100%, which means that while that benefit had been set up, the annuitant themselves is not going to suffer on the death of their spouse.
Okay, so I understand that they get the full pension payment monthly back, but there is no kind of a payout for the fact that money was set. It is their investment, right?
Mrs. Wagenthal, I'm sorry.
That's
I know
fine.
that you're going to come back in the next round. So
thank you, Chair.
Keep your question. Thank you. You're very welcome. And right now, I'd like to invite Mr. Shan Casey for 6 minutes, please. Shan.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Is my sound quality okay? I didn't do a sound check before. It's okay? Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. Pick up exactly where Ms. Wagenthal left off, because I am interested in the conversation around the optional survivor's benefit. So to come back to her scenario, if we have a veteran who decides to take a lower monthly amount in exchange for the right for his surviving spouse in the event of his death to receive a reduced pension. There has been concern expressed by the committee and by some of the witnesses that where that happens and where the spouse dies, that the amount that has been foregone by the veteran effectively lapses. I heard Ms. Tattersall indicate that if that death happens while the veteran is still drawing, that he is fully that he or she is fully made whole. So my question is this, and I don't want it to appear cold or callous, but in these types of defined benefit programs, they're all based on actuarial calculations that factor in death rates and the like. So it's if someone lives to 100, they would draw more than the average. If someone dies the day after the papers are signed to make the transfer, they make less. Is that not the theory behind why what seems to be unfair to a certain group of people exists? Ms. Tattersall, if you'd like to take a run at this, and the person from the Treasury Board may have some comments as well.
So thank you for the question. It's one that I'm not prepared perhaps to give you a fulsome answer to. You're quite right that in the broader sense, this is based on actuarial assessments, which means that you will have some individuals who will draw 5 years of the pension benefits that they have worked their entire career for. Equally, you may have someone who in fact then receives a pension for over 40 years because they happen to have that longevity. It is all calculated on the basis of trying to achieve that best investment so that the funds will be there to try and ensure that you continue to receive your benefits, whether you are short-lived or long-lived. I'm not sure whether that gives you a satisfactory answer, and perhaps this might be one that, because it applies to all the plans, that a Treasury Board might be a better place to answer.
Yeah. Okay. No, I appreciate that. It's just my understanding is that's the nature of these types of funds, and that probably didn't satisfy Ms. Wagenthal's curiosity, but I think we're both curious about the same topic, so we'll come back to it. I want to come to you, Ms. Garrett-Baird. You started in your opening remarks to outline this. What we're studying, of course, is focused on what survivors of veterans don't get, and you gave us a long list of what survivors of veterans do get. And one of the things that you mentioned was a payment that is for survivors of veterans if the death is service related. Can you expand on that a little more?
Absolutely. Thank you for the question. So essentially, where a veteran passes away as a result of a service-related disability, for example, if they're on an overseas deployment and killed during that situation, unfortunately, that would be considered a service-related death, and therefore the income replacement benefit would be available to the survivor of that individual who passed.
Thank you. The other programs that you identified were the Veterans Emergency Fund and the Veterans Independence Program. Was there another one?
I also referenced the disability pension, which is the monthly amount. So if we look right now, the Veterans Emergency Fund in last fiscal year, about just over $1 million was provided in support to 574 veterans and survivors. We also have the Veterans Independence Program, which provides a number of supports and services to veterans. For example, right now it is supporting 28,000 survivors alone. Income replacement benefit is being provided to approximately 400 survivors. We have disability benefits being provided to over 36,000 survivors as well. So that just gives you some scope on the number of survivors that we are supporting through a variety of mechanisms, both shorter term, such as the Veterans Emergency Fund, and longer term through disability benefits and the income replacement benefit.
You indicated when you embarked on this that the only information that Veterans Affairs had was the number of people who opted into the optional survivors benefit. How many was that?
I do not have that number right in front of me. I can get it for you, but that was the challenge. When Budget 2019 was announced, the only administrative data that we could access with any level of certainty was the number of individuals in receipt of the optional survivor benefit. But we really wanted to get at who was not receiving that benefit. Hence why we worked with Statistics Canada, the Canadian Armed Forces, and the Canadian Institute of Military, Veteran and Health Research to obtain both qualitative and quantitative data and work through recruitment of individuals to support the work that Dr. Lee did.
Merci.
Thank you, Mr. Casey. I would also like to tell the members of the committee that even if the Treasury Board Secretariat didn't make any introductory comments, we do have two representatives with us, Nadine Labrie, who is the Senior Director of Pensions and Benefits, and Simon Crabtree, the Executive Director of Pension and Benefits, and they're here to answer your questions. I did see a hand go up at some point. Mr. Crabtree, you must want to ask a question about something that was said. We will get to you shortly. The members will speak up again in order to speak with you. So I would like to invite the second Vice President of the committee, Mr. Luc Desilets, to take the mic for 6 minutes. Thank you. My question is for Mrs. Tattersall. I hope I've pronounced that correctly. Have there been any actuarial studies that were serious to determine the cost, the total cost of the changing of this clause after 60 years old?
That was sent to the Parliamentary Budget Office in the 2009, I believe it was 2012, for which there was an initial actuarial assessment done for 3 of the plans as to what this would potentially cost. But that was well over a decade ago, and in the scope of actuarial assessments, those numbers would no longer be considered valid just because the data would have changed.
It's difficult for me to understand that in the past 10 years we haven't gone over that again, because it is a very important issue for thousands of women. How do you make sense of the fact that your department hasn't even tried to find this amount? Is it millions? Is it thousands?
Toujours pour vous, Madame Tattersall.
Still for you, Mrs. Tattersall.
Oui, merci. La réponse, c'est...
The answer is that we've had many challenges with regards to different issues when receiving a pension.
Have not examined this particular issue. It is one that we are aware of. We regularly receive questions about this issue, which we provide responses to, but it is not at this time one that I have had the means to be able to engage a specific study on. And again, it is an issue that is not just specific to the Canadian Forces Superannuation Act. It does also impact the public service as well as the RCMP, and I believe a couple of the other acts, which I think that my colleague from Treasury Board would be well placed to explain.
Monsieur Desilets.
Mr. Desilets, I've seen Mr. Crabtree's hand go up, and maybe he wants to answer your question. Go ahead.
The numbers that were calculated more than a decade ago estimated a total nearing $1 billion in terms of the cost to implement that. To give you a sense of order of magnitude, based on assumption changes that we've seen elsewhere, you could conservatively double that number as far as a cost. We would of course have to run exact scenarios based on the latest actuarial data, but a $2 billion figure would probably bring you into the right ballpark.
Merci pour cette réponse.
Thank you for your answer. Mrs. Tattersall, once again, the Minister, Anita Hanan, is she aware of this issue of the after 60 clause?
Oui.
No, we have not had a chance at this point to fully brief the minister on issues such as this, and it's one of a number of ones that clearly she would need to be briefed on. She has been very busy with other issues. Over.
Je comprends.
I understand. We're analyzing this issue at Veteran Affairs. What I'm understanding is that this is actually an issue that should be more of a national defense issue. Am I wrong?
So, si la question est dirigée à moi, c'est
Oui.
pas
If the question is for me, it's not just an issue for the Canadian Armed Forces.
The marriage after 60 clause is also in the public service to a different, it's worded in a different way, as well as in the RCMP. So this issue is more than just about the Canadian Forces Superannuation Act.
OK. Est-ce qu'il y a, encore une fois...
Again, Mrs. Tatters, I'll leave you alone afterwards. Have there been any discussions with the Ministry of Veterans Affairs with regards to this clause?
Since I have held the responsibilities as DGCB, no, on n'a pas eu des décisions.
We haven't had any specific discussions, except for the discussion we had about showing up here today. Thank you. That's all for me today, Mr. President. Mr. Chair.
Monsieur Desilets, maintenant.
Thank you, Mr. Desilets. I'd like to invite Mrs. Rachel Blaney to take the floor for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Chair, and I thank all the folks that are here testifying today. It's very helpful and interesting. My first questions are going to be for Dr. Lee. First of all, thank you very much for your presentation, and I thank you for including the quotes from some of the folks you worked with. I found those to be very impactful. You talked in your written remarks about the difficulty of finding veterans and survivors to participate in the study. Obviously, COVID was a considerable challenge. I would also argue that another challenge is the fact that the people you were asking to do this work are very dedicated to this country and very service-oriented and don't like to say anything bad about the country that they were willing to put their life on the line. So I guess my question to you is, how did you find the 10 participants? Was there any modification about how you attracted those participants based on their service history and the fact that this is a group of people that largely serve their country, don't complain? And what was the criteria and where in Canada were those folks living? I just want to get a sense of if they were across the country or located largely in one or two centers.
No, they are across the countries, but we got individuals from the Atlantic Canadas and then Ontario's, BC's, having couples from Alberta's, but so we do have a pretty good spectrum, even though there's 10 people. So I think our recruitment strategy is through multiple networks that we did run some Facebook ads and also kind of try to join some community group for that. And turn out actually like the next generations refer their parents or their moms to kind of our studies. And we go through different personal network through the veterans community we know. So in UBC for that, we have the STAR office, which is kind of having really good relationship with the ND and also veteran affairs for that. And then so they help us to kind of find some lead here and there for that. But you're right for that, just like the COVID, and we are the first kind of pretty much a few studies really impacted by COVID. And also thinking about the demographic for that is really hard to use like electronics mediums to reach them out for that. And so a lot of relying like the personal connections and multiple layers for that. And that's really the challenge we're having. Yeah.
So I just want to clarify, were they all veterans or were there any RCMP veterans or federal public service? All veterans?
It's
okay.
All military veterans. We limit that. Yep.
Okay, perfect. And how many of the 10 participants had married after 60, or were there any that had married before 60? And can you tell us generally with those 10 participants,
Sure. What
was their general income status, and were they all retirees living on a fixed income?
Well, I would say that 2 of the veterans is falling into like the married after 60, kind of a category for that. And then so we have like 3 veterans for that, which is in a relationship after kind of like they're 60 plus, and then currently in a relationship. So if kind of like they are kind of like struggles with that current policy for that. And then we also do a little bit like comparisons, and then so with like the survivor who married to the veterans before the veterans turned 60. So the other like and 5 individuals for that is falling into that category. We do a little bit like comparisons. And I would say that most of them are middle income, low income for that, and then so lower incomes. And one of the reasons because we have a few veterans or the survivor, we call the veterans, they do have some injuries because of the service. So they're not going to get a full-time jobs, or they kind of retire early because of different type of like physical and mental disabilities. So having said that, they are not the high income category. So I would just say that's my sample size. Yep.
Okay, thank you. That's really helpful. One of your recommendations was to consider removing the age limit, which I really appreciate. So I'm just wondering, did you conclude that the marriage after 60 clause should be eliminated in order to treat spouses fairly and recognize their personal sacrifice?
Well, I would say all the military spouses sacrifice in many ways for that. I think based on my studies or interview with these 10 individuals, they are, to some extent, they're very upset about that age limit. It sounds arbitrary for them. So they said that if I get married at the age of 59, what's the differences between if I get married at the age of 61? Why setting up these boundaries or these limitations? And so I really kind of seeing that very strong components for the why I kind of put myself or my partner into this disadvantaged position. So then I can say that that's why my recommendation is just like we need to consider removing this age limitation. Yeah.
And I find that interesting because you talked about the attachment people had to being called a gold digger. And I've actually talked to a lot of people that are survivors or who are planning to be survivors. That's a hard thing to say, but that impact on being called a gold digger, I've been really surprised by that really affects them. I'm just wondering if you saw that as well.
Yeah, two participants really point that out, especially like the spouse is a little bit younger, like 10 years or 20 years younger than the veterans. And when they get together for that, they just like receiving all those social stigma. I think one veteran said that, well, I'm kind of get away from that stigma because I have a full-time job. And then but I can definitely see that is kind of a surrounding with the social stigmas. Yeah.
And then my last question, I've only got a few seconds, is around streamlining access to benefits on the VAC website. Could you just tell us a little bit more and what challenges these participants had in accessing these services?
They just didn't really have I would use the term is like they don't have the literacy to navigate through all the government websites, because technically I know there's a lot of programs supporting them, but the challenge is like they're 60, they might be 70 something years over that they lost their spouse, and every month they're getting a paycheck or they're getting a check from the government office for that, which is great. And now suddenly putting these older adults in a situation, and I think that's the challenging part we have to streamline, thinking about how to really supporting, thinking about their demographic for that. They're 70 years old plus, and then so we have to find ways to help them. But thank you for your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Lee, and thank you, Ms. Bliney. And now let's go to the second round. And I would like to invite my honorable member, Fraser Tolmie, for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and great to see you again. And thank you to all the presenters today. I have to say that we've sat through numerous meetings concerning this this subject, and when I came into this meeting, obviously we've heard a lot of testimonies, and so to finish us off with you is great, and I want to say thank you for your service and thank you for what you're doing, and appreciate it. Mr. Lee, as I go through your report, it's been highlighted that you met with 7 people, and when we heard from Statistics Canada that there was close to 6,000 veterans or survivors that are currently affected by this. Before you started doing your report, I'm sure you had something envisioned in your mind. How many people did you think you were actually going to be able to connect with over this?
Well, we briefly worked with the Veterans Affairs Office Communications Department. So we identified 200, I forgot the exact numbers, over 200 individuals. We send them in kind of like invitations to participate. But turn out just like there's a few leads coming back to us, and in that way, for that we did identify some address and direct to those individuals. But that would be kind of like we try very hard to kind of like come to. We keep constantly go back to different, but it's in the big lockdown period, and then so in 2020, I'm happy to continue if I have a chance to, because I believe that there's more people out there who are willing to share their voices, but we have a time constraints about the project funding. And then we tried again the beginning of the COVID for that. And we even approached like that as senior facilities in Edmonton and serving the veteran community, and they don't accept research project because they just running out of staff to managing their everyday operations. Yeah.
Well, and please don't take this line of questioning as reflective on your performance. What I find that I'm having a hard time bringing together here is that through personal testimonies, this is a very sensitive subject for a lot of people. And so when they've got an opportunity to actually speak to it and get engaged, I find it very, like I say, I can't reconcile the fact that those numbers don't seem to line up. So thank you for that. As I said, it's not reflective on you, and I'm just concerned about the engagement of this report. So is your report public, or has it just been disclosed to the Veterans Affairs Committee?
Well, I would say that I submitted full versions of the report to SIMPR, so they have but I don't think I make it public, but I'm happy to, again, I may talk to Mr. Clark, but I'm happy to share the entire report with the committee here. Yep.
Right, okay. And so just kind of springboarding from those, how long did it take for you to prepare this report? And apart from what we've just discussed, were there any other challenges that you feel maybe impacted the information that's been presented?
What we say is it takes us like kind of in total 6 months or more around that, kind of like to reach out to the participants or to recruit the participants to interview them. Usually like take around an hour to 2 maximums, and then so our conversations online. So, and it took us probably like around 2 to 3 months to analyzing all the data. And our report is mainly capturing the voices from the interviewees we have. And then we just like honestly report that and gathering those like voices into different themes. And in the full report, we cover a little bit more because I also cover a little bit like the veteran transitions pattern. And then so, but that would be kind of like the abstract of the versions I present to you all today.
Okay, thank you. And I know, Mr. Chair, I'm probably going to get red carded fairly quickly here. So
exactly.
Yeah. So
in 15 seconds.
I've got 15 seconds. Well, then the only other comment I have is, Mr. Crabtree, do you think Verstappen's got a chance this weekend in Spain? I saw that he's a big F1 fan there. I see that in the background.
I love that the conversation went here. I think he's got the momentum. We'll leave it at that.
All right. Well, he's fifth right now. Okay.
We'll see. Thank you, Mr. Tolmie. And now I'd like to invite Mr. Wilson Miao for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for the witness attending today's study. It's very important for us to realize how much our veterans have done for us, and I really think the study will allow us to move further and support these veterans. I'd like to direct the following question through the chair to Ms. Tattersall regarding on the survivor benefit. Can you briefly explain to us what is the application process? Since this is an optional funding application that a veteran can apply for.
So, Mr. Chair, thank you. I can't speak to the mechanism in terms of the specific forms, but the process is that if a member does marry or enter into a relationship, they must apply for an optional survivor benefit within 1 year of their marriage. And that application for the benefit is done through the pension center, who will then provide them. So it starts with a query to the pension center, and then the pension center will provide them with the appropriate forms. I apologize. That was not a question that I came prepared to give you any more specifics than that.
Well, thank you for what you have provided so far. But to further to that questions, how much does the applicant have to contribute in order to allow the survivor benefit fund for their spouse?
So, Mr. Chair, it is the applicant's, the annuitant's decision as to how much they want to create as a benefit, and they can choose that it be 30, 40, or 50%. It is their choice. It is not a fixed amount by which they have to prescribe.
Thank you very much. And is it true that after, let's say, the applicant passed away after 60, and the surviving spouse will not be eligible to collect that funding afterwards?
Sorry, I'm not quite understanding the question, Mr. Chair. So if the survivor passes away, what happens is that the annuitant will not now recoup into some account the amount that was set aside for the survivor benefit. What happens, so in other words, they're not going to be made whole for the period of time for which they took a reduced annuity so that they could create the benefit. However, what happens is that their pension then will go back up to 100% of what they would have received had they never created the optional survivor benefit itself. I hope that answers the question.
Thank you so much, because it's important for us to understand this, because there are also other pensions benefit in the private sector and outside that a veteran can also look into. Am I correct?
There is certainly members who are part of the CFS, the Canadian Forces Superannuation Act, receiving benefits, also receive benefits under the Canada Pension Plan and or the Quebec Pension Plan, depending, of course, on what their province of residence is. They would be entitled to the OAS, the Old Age Supplement, if they met the threshold. And then obviously anything that they had invested on their own by way of RRSP funds to create further benefits for themselves, but that would be on their side.
Thank you for sharing that with us. You mentioned there is between the veteran survivor, RCMP, and other public service survivor, there are different acts there, but it's very similar in context where any marriage after 60, they're not eligible for the survivor benefit fund.
Mr. Chair, I would request that actually that be Treasury Board that please respond to that one.
Please, maybe Ms. Garrett-Baird can answer to that.
No, as Brigadier General Tattersall indicated, I would defer this one to Treasury Board Secretariat, because Veterans Affairs Canada has no jurisdiction over any of the superannuation acts that have been referenced.
Well, let's try with Mr. Crabtree.
Mr. Crabtree, yes.
So could you please repeat your question in terms of just making sure I understand? Is this in relation to purchase of annuities or?
Across the veteran survivor and RCMP and other public service survivor, how much, how are they different in context, and whether or not marriage after 60 will allow their annuity to be shared to their surviving spouse?
In 15 seconds. Excuse me, Mr. Crabtree.
All right, we'll be very quick.
That's right, yes.
They all have very similar optional survivor benefits. They are all actuarially determined, so they're calculated based on an actuarial formula as to what the reduction should be in the benefit to pay for this, depending on what the member opts for as far as a replacement benefit for their surviving spouse.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you, Mr. Miao. And now I'd like to invite Mr. Luc Desilets. Donc, Monsieur Desilets, vous avez le plancher pour 2 minutes et demie, s'il vous plaît. Allez-y.
Mr. Desilets, the floor is yours for 2.5 minutes. I have a few questions for Mrs. Garrett-Baird. You referred to the pensioners' funds, which is a $150 million fund. How much of that money has been used until today?
Has been used to date. The funding for research came from within the department's reference levels, and we have not accessed that $150 million that was put forward in budget 2019.
OK. Donc, il existe depuis 3 ans.
So it has existed for 3 years, and we have 2 more years to use it. Are there any plans to use it?
Our focus, when Budget 2019 was announced, as I noted, we had no information really about this group of individuals to even know what their needs were or how this fund could properly address their needs. We did not want to create a fund that did not meet the needs of the survivors that were targeted. As such, we engaged in 2 elements of research. One being the qualitative research as introduced by Dr. Lee today. And I do want to indicate there that there was a lot of work done with Dr. Lee to support recruitment. Veterans Affairs Canada did share on its social media the study that was underway and how participants were needed. We also supported mailouts and offered to engage veterans organizations. The second element was the quantitative data piece that was undertaken with Statistics Canada, and that was absolutely pivotal to inform us about the size and characteristics of this population. And as I mentioned, that population is around 4,500 people.
Je vais vous couper parce que j'ai pas beaucoup de temps.
I'm going to cut you off because I don't have much time. Does Mr. Lee's report, can we make it available to this committee?
I believe that Dr. Lee indicated that he would make that available. I also want to reiterate that the research, both from Statistics Canada and the study that Dr. Lee did, are very key to what we're doing right now, which is determining what options and what's the way forward for the Veterans Survivors Fund.
On nous garantit que le rapport va être rendu disponible.
So you're guaranteeing that the report will be made available. So from Statistics Canada, they gave us an idea of the results, but they were not given the command to give us an analysis of those results. It's a pretty complex number. Is it possible to have an analysis since there is money available? Can we have an analysis of their work because they can do it?
I can share with you the numbers that I shared in my opening remarks in terms of how many individuals were identified by Statistics Canada, the percentage that was female, the percentage that are above and below the low income median line. So we're happy to share that information.
Thank you, Mrs. Garrett-Baird. And for 2 minutes and a half, I'd like to invite Miss Rachel Blaney. Please go ahead.
Thank you. And I am going to have to rely on the witnesses to decide who the best person is to answer this question. I think it may be Mr. Crabtree, but if I'm wrong, you will let me know. So what I am trying to understand, because this is unique, when we think about the folks that are in this situation with the marriage after 60 clause, they are the ones that fill out the optional survivor's benefit. That is not a normal practice from other pensions, from what I understand. We won't get into that. But what I am trying to understand is if a member fills that form out, gives up between 30 to 50% of their pension, for example, one of the veterans that we are working with right now who has submitted over $150,000 to put away for his wife when he passes. Now the wife is not doing well, and it doesn't look like she's going to be with us much longer. So when that happens, the veteran, I understand, is removed from the OSB program. Their pension returns to 100%. But what happens to all of that money, in this case, $150,000? Will that money come back to the veteran? Because this is them giving up their pension. It's not, to me, the same as being a person who lives 5 years or 40 years. It is about saying, here's some of my money, I'm giving it up because I don't want this person to be without. So could somebody please explain, does that money just stay in that big pot, or does any of that money come back to the person whose pension it was, who signed off on the optional survivor's benefit?
Thank you. So I would look at the optional survivor benefit, which, as you pointed out, is something that is not offered by most pension plans. It is something that the public sector plans put in place. I think it was in 1992 as an option. This I would look at like a term life insurance. So it's an option that is provided to members that allows them to provide for a spouse who otherwise wouldn't qualify under a normal pension survivor benefit. But it's true that not in all cases will the member's surviving spouse benefit from that. So it's possible that they will pay in for a benefit and take a reduction for a period of time where they won't yield the benefit of it. So yes, the plan would not be paying out in those circumstances, and the funds would remain in the plan.
Thank you. I think that's my time, Speaker, Chair, but thank you for answering that question clearly. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup, Madame Blaney.
Thank you, Mrs. Blaney. We're going to move on to Frank Caputo, who is the first Vice President of the committee. 5 minutes.
Chair, I'm going to actually follow up because I believe that MP Blaney kind of stole my thunder there. I'm really having trouble with the numbers with this and how it all works. And as the panel has probably gathered, one of the biggest points of contention is a veteran attempting to provide for their spouse or partner, and that the money that they attempted to provide for their spouse and partner ultimately is relinquished to not come back to them. So to Mr. Crabtree or to Brigadier General Tattersall, and before I even begin, sorry, I just launched in because I was so inspired by MP Blaney's question. First off, thank you all for your service and for being here. I neglected to say that right from the get-go. But I'm just going to use an example because I'm having a lot of trouble visualizing this. I think that for me, it's helpful if we use tangible numbers. So let's say a veteran has a $3,000 pension monthly, or let's say $4,000, a big pension, $4,000. And they decide we can give 20%, 30%, I believe it was, or 50%, something along those lines. And they decide to give 50%. So that means that they're putting away $2,000, as I understand it, every single month. And that $2,000 is there to compensate in the event that the veteran passes prior to their surviving spouse. Is everybody with me so far? Okay. So after 4 years, by my math, that's roughly $96,000 that has been put aside at $2,000 per month over 4 years. My question is this. If I understand this correctly, that $96,000 does not, and hypothetically, if the spouse or partner, common law spouse, passes away at the 4-year mark, do I have it correctly that $96,000 is never to be seen again?
So I will go on this one first here, but I mean, in essence, you're right that the contributions or the amount that's reduced rather of the benefit is foregone. Pension plans are a a pooling of risks between members, and they're not designed to pay out in every case for exactly what people pay into them. There are many employees or members who pay into these plans who never receive out what they paid into them because they are deceased before they can yield those benefits or otherwise. That's true across all of our public sector plans. But as I said, I would look at the optional survivor benefit like purchasing a term life insurance policy. It's to say that you are paying something for an insurance benefit that would be paid out to a spouse. But if that spouse predeceases you, that term life insurance policy that you've been paying into, those contributions that you made to that policy would not be returned to you afterwards. It is an insurance you'd be purchasing essentially. And this is similar.
Of course. See, now the distinction I draw, sir, is this. I pay, say, $1,000 a year for, say, an $800,000 policy. In other words, I will probably never see that $1,000 a year. And the reason I'll never see that is because I'm a 43-year-old who is unlikely to perish. And an actuary has done the math and said this is where it's going to go. Now, never seeing that $1,000 a year again on a term life insurance, I think we can all agree is substantially different than paying 50% of your pension into something for your spouse to never see it again if they die first. Can we, am I being clear first of all on this?
You're being exceptionally clear, but I would make the point here that we're talking about very different time horizons. You have very little time for most of these people opting into an optional survivor benefit to accumulate any money into a plan. So if they were to go out at, say, 65 and buy a term life insurance policy for the kinds of money that we're talking about, they wouldn't be paying $1,000 a month. They'd be paying many $1,000s a month. So, it's very similar to a term life insurance policy if they were going to go out on a private market to buy a similar type of coverage. So it's actuarially derived. These calculations are representative of the cost that is the real cost to the plan for offering this benefit. These are not unfavorable calculations.
I see what you're saying. I fully understand what you're saying there because you're right. Buying term life insurance at 65 is a lot different than buying term life insurance at 43. I am mindful of that. Now, clearly, though, is there some sort of, in your experience, in anybody's experience, is there some sort of an information gap here where people may be not realizing that, not seeing that? Because if I'm a veteran and I'm paying $2,000 a month,
Mr. Caputo, I'm so sorry. You're going to have to come back in the next round.
I was on a roll, Chair, but go ahead.
I understand that. Yeah.
Thank you.
J'ai compris que Madame Blaney vous a inspiré.
I understand that you were inspired by Mrs. Blaney.
Of questions, I'd like to invite Mrs. Rachel Valdez for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to all the witnesses who are joining us for this important study. We've spoken to many witnesses, and as my colleagues have mentioned, this topic is very sensitive, and a lot of them have been, very impacted by this. So these questions I'm going to direct to Mrs. Garrett Barrett. Hopefully this is for you. If not, you can repoint me. So you mentioned that the $150 million was not used as of yet. And obviously the work, it sounds like, is now underway with the study that's being the report that's being put in front of us. Are you able to share what alternate programs, if any, can be used to distribute the 150? Are we at the point where, you're formulating or thinking through, what we're able to distribute or hoping to distribute?
Yes, so thank you for the question. So what we're doing right now is based on the research, both the qualitative and quantitative, both of which were inevitably delayed due to the pandemic. And I think that that's a very key consideration here, is now that we have that, we have been looking at it, and we're now using that to determine what are the options, what are the right approaches that could be a consideration for a veteran survivor fund, and how best to support this population. So that's where we're really at, while taking into consideration the other programs and services that the department offers, such as the Veterans Independence Program, disability pensions, income replacement benefit, back assistance line, and then other social support programming such as the Guaranteed Income Supplement, Old Age Security, Canada Pension Plan. And so we're looking at things holistically as we look at the options and the data.
I appreciate that context. So I'm going to transition to ask you a bit about the Quebec model. As I understand it, their system deems the spouse of public sector retirees eligible for pension regardless of age at marriage. Have any other jurisdictions that you know of used this model, and do you think it could be used at the national level?
I can't speak to the model from a pension perspective. I can only speak to what Veterans Affairs Canada is providing and what they do, but perhaps my colleagues at Treasury Board Secretariat would like to weigh in on that.
Yeah, I mean, I can speak to this at a very high level, in that we know that only a few pension plans in Canada offer a survivor benefit to a spouse or common law partner whose union begins after retirement. So as you pointed out, there is the Quebec plan, as well as the Ontario Municipal Employees Retirement System, which have those. So in both of those cases, the benefit that's provided to the spouse at death, and is only provided to that one survivor. So that's to say that a married spouse would have priority over a common law spouse in cases where a plan member was, say, separated at the time of death. So thus, even the plans that may offer that post-retirement benefit, there are still obviously some eligibility restrictions. That means that the person that's living with the member upon their death may not receive a survivor benefit. So it should be noted that these plans provide a benefit that's also a percentage of what the member was receiving, rather than a percentage of an unreduced pension benefit, which is what we offer under the public sector plans here in the federal government.
Got it. Thank you. And you've heard already, we've talked about this before, but in the US, they're trying to take steps to remove the gold diggers clause. It's very hurtful to those because, put yourself in their position. I mean, who wants to be called a gold digger? So has Veterans Affairs or, conducted any cross-jurisdictional research to look into having this removed here in Canada, or for the Canadian government to remove it?
So the focus of the work at Veterans Affairs Canada has been on the research around the population and the Veterans Survivors Fund. Given that we do not have jurisdiction over any of the pension plans referenced, whether it's the RCMP Superannuation Act, Canadian Forces Superannuation Act, or Public Service Superannuation Act, we have not done comparisons, but my colleagues from either National Defence or TBS may want to add there.
Well, perhaps speaking broadly here for a moment, I would say that it's unfortunate, firstly, that gold digger connotation is associated with this provision, because it's really not what it's intended to do. I mean, I think that the restrictions on marriage after retirement really were about aligning with family law and directions as to who would have rights to pension assets. Wherein rather family law would guarantee the rights of spouses regarding assets acquired during a period of marriage or common law union. So as far as studies, we haven't done much work in this respect. There's not been much direction. Obviously, the question comes up from time to time. The provisions offered under the plans are very, very similar to what's offered under most other Canadian plans. And as we noted earlier, the optional survivor benefit is actually a more generous and flexible option that was added to our plan that doesn't exist elsewhere.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Valdez. So I'd like to propose to all of you, witnesses and members, that we're going to do another round of questions. It's for 25 minutes. And after that, we can take a half break, and because we have until 4 o'clock. But any objections? So we can go on with another round of 25 minutes. That's great. Okay. So I invite Mrs. Wagenthal for 5 more minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair. Okay, so, I look at this and it concerns me deeply. I don't think we're advising our veterans on the best direction of action to take as they get older, and they choose to get married at 60. I have to say, obviously, things are different now than they were many, many years ago, and this is a norm. I am concerned that since 1994, there have been 9 private members' bills on this issue, and then a motion in 2006, and then 2015 mandate letter from the Prime Minister made it a top priority to eliminate the marriage after 60 clawback clause. And then, of course, in budget 2019, that was all gone. And we're into a Veteran Survivors Fund approach. Clearly, I don't think our government is in a position right now to look at what this would cost to make those changes that really, on a personal level for these veterans, should be there. I have a question about that $150 million over 5 years, and that it hasn't been spent. The way I read it, to better support surviving spouses after age of 60, budget 2019 announced $150 million over 5 years, starting in 2019, to create a Veteran Survivor Fund. However, that, as you're saying, needs to be created. $30 million a year. Why is there not far better research going into what this needs to be? Moving forward, it looks to me like it's not going to be set up well, if it is set up at all, and needs to have that proper research. Dr. Lee, what would you have liked to have seen available to you to do a more rounded approach to this particular study that you did?
What we suggest for that, there will be some kind of data triangulations we have to put together, because when I'm doing my qualitative research, I know that StatCan is also doing. There's kind of putting out the numbers for that. I think at certain points, but it would be nice to see both data sets is kind of talk to each other. I think that would be one next step I would like to see. And I'm also see some opportunities kind of really getting those actual individuals got impacted and really kind of seeing what the needs and kind of really from our governments is helping them for that, because as I mentioned, for that would be a spectrum of victims and also the survivors kind of fall into this particular category for that. And many of them are age 70 plus, and then so, and many of them are living in very remote areas, but that is not kind of someone you can see every day in Vancouver or Toronto. So having said that, I think more efforts need to put into kind of really identify those individuals who got impacted. Okay. Yeah, I think that would be my suggestion.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. Mr. Crabtree, you were talking about the actuary assessments and that hasn't been one for at least a decade. Is that normal? Like, I look at this and the amount of concern that has grown, and you see it in the House of Commons through these bills, through these promises, and then these changes. Why is there not a more up-to-date, constant reckoning of what this is actually going to cost the government if this was to happen or this was to happen, to enable us to budget properly? Because, or you know, I don't see that, or you to budget properly to make sure that the program can function.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. Ultimately, we tend to do costings and enlist the services of the Office of the Chief Actuary to support us in doing that kind of analysis only on an as-needed basis. I mean, this does cost the plans money to perform these kinds of services, and there are a lot of different proposals that are put forward for changes to the plans. So unless something is being put forward for consideration by a government, we tend not to ask the Office of the Chief Actuary to undertake this work.
Because it costs.
It does come with a cost, and that cost is borne by the plan. And so we try and minimize and find economies there.
Yeah, fair enough. I think it's important we understand these things and that veterans understand these things. I have a question for Ms. Garrett-Baird. You mentioned the different programs that are available for survivors to access. One of them you're mentioning is the VIP. But again, here's the catch. It says, if it was used by the veteran. I can tell you that, it's one thing to be the veteran if you're the male in the family who may continue to do things like shovel and cut the grass. But if you're suddenly gone, and that wife who is in, I can attest to the fact that I would struggle with those responsibilities. And yet here it's attached again to whether or not the spouse needed it before they passed away. This to me seems unreasonable. if we're truly concerned about meeting the needs of that veteran's spouse. And you're right, as Mr. Crabtree said, we're talking about people in their 70s and 80s, now occasionally 90s.
Yes.
Uh-oh.
Mrs.
Can
Garrett.
she give a brief reply?
Yes. In 15
Thank you
seconds,
so much, Chair.
Mrs. Okay, I agree. Mrs. Garrett Bird, okay, go ahead for 15, 20 seconds, please.
Sure, I'll be very quick. So there is the ability, there's low-income gateways as well through the Veterans Independence Program for some primary caregivers for housekeeping and grounds maintenance. So there are other opportunities there that we can work through and support those individuals.
Thank you. That was quick. And j'aimerais maintenant inviter Monsieur Stéphane Lauzon.
I'd like to invite Mr. Stéphane Lauzon to take the mic for the next 5 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. First, I'd like to thank the witnesses today who are here on a Friday afternoon. I'd like to start with something that piqued my curiosity. First, with Mr. Lee, the difficulty of getting in contact with witnesses, especially during the pandemic. As you know, it's been a lot more difficult in the last little while. I also have a certain concern with regards to how to reach them when we have technological problems, especially if they are in rural areas where the internet is not available and where seniors are not as accustomed to using the internet and the equipment that is required for such communication. What have been your challenges in order to reach seniors who are in rural areas, who have difficulty with the internet connections and with equipment?
I rely on the second generation. I briefly mentioned that. So if they can help us to set up, let's say the video conferencing is good, but I did have some interview done on phone. So they don't have internet access, but kind of like they call us and then we set up a 1 hour's telephone conversations with them. So we still kind of like reach out to those individuals. And a good numbers of those participants actually are living in the remote regions for that. But having said this, the COVID is really limit our outreach. And then so I would say in the ideals or dream scenario for that, I would like to go to those places and interview them in their own house and seeing the situations for that. And really working closely with the legions. But their lunch is all canceled, their all gatherings is all canceled for that. But having said that, just like that would be some of the vehicle I can imagine if not interrupted by COVID.
Let's talk about the Legion because there's lots of Legion. They're far away from the big center. You know, they're located in rural area and they don't even have internet by themselves. So how it was the collaboration with those organizations?
Yeah, well, we reached out to 200 plus legions, and then but didn't really have a lot of response to us. And for those response to us, but that we only know they cancel all the meeting during that time. Yeah.
So it was a difficulty. J'ai une question pour.
I have a question for Mrs. Garrett Baird. In the process of pensions and the change of pensions that we've had in the past, did you have a role to play in collaboration with various partners? So the National Defense or the Treasury and the Treasury Board or even the Minister of the Legal Minister? The Justice Minister, were you consulted with regards to making any decisions?
Could I clarify if you're referencing the Veterans Survivors Fund or the Superannuation
the Veterans
Act?
Survivors Fund. Yeah, we start from there, from the Survivors Fund.
So with respect to the Veterans Survivors Fund, when Budget 2019 was announced, we engaged with Statistics Canada along with Canadian Armed Forces, Department of National Defence to determine what data was available. And then when we determined that the amount of administrative data only related to the optional survivor benefit, we then continued to work forward on how we could obtain the quantitative data needed for us to learn about the characteristics and size of this population. So we worked with both of those organizations, along with the Canadian Institute of Military and Veteran Health Research on the qualitative piece that Dr. Lee has spoken with. So we, and then of course, Treasury Board Secretariat is aware of this fund as well, but they're working through it in terms of awareness, and they're responsible for other superannuation acts.
Merci pour la réponse.
Thank you for your answer. So if I've understood correctly, you worked together, but in this actual iteration, the Survivors Fund, can you tell us what the benefits are and the advantages are, and tell us if you have spoken about seniors who have low income and about sharing of income of survivors during those discussions?
Yes, we have. So we, through the work that we undertook with Statistics Canada, we were able to determine the number of individuals in this population. As I mentioned, it's estimated to be 4,500, and that most had higher incomes compared to other Canadian females in the same age group. And over 1,200 survivors, or 27%, were in receipt of the Guaranteed Income Supplement, and approximately 850 of the 4,500 living survivors, or 19%, had incomes below the low-income measure. And then just to note as well that we of course are engaged with other partners across government, one of them being ESDC, and we are aware that there are changes to the Old Age Security Program coming into play on July 2022 for survivors, for individuals 75 years and older.
Merci, Madame Garrett.
Thank you, Mrs. Garrett-Baird. And now I would like to give the mic to Mr. Luc Desilets for 2.5 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. A few questions for Mr. Crabtree. We spoke about $1 billion in terms of the cost of this infamous program. Do you have a bit more information? Can you give us more details about what would the $1 billion include?
So this $1 billion or $2 billion or whatever the final amount would be is an adjustment to the overall liability. So this would be a one-time adjustment to the obligations of the pension plan to reflect these new expected benefits to be paid out over the course of current members' lifetimes and then in survivor benefits. This would not include members who have already retired and have predeceased. So this would leave questions as to current members, I suppose, because this is on a go-forward basis. So that $2 billion, is, just to reiterate, is a go-forward for those who are currently members and paying into the plan, and not those who have already retired or who have already predeceased their survivors.
Et ça, pardon, et ça inclurait?
Would that include the after 60 clause? And would that include the after retirement clause? Everything would be in there, in the $2 billion, including everything in the past?
So that $2 billion figure notionally is the removal of the marriage after 60 clause from all three public sector pension plans.
Parfait.
Only for current members paying in, and
perfect.
And not those beforehand.
Okay, vous avez fait référence au REGOP qui semble être.
You referred to an example of a retirement fund example. Do you think that that would be applicable? Speaking of the Quebec plan.
Different plan sponsors have different objectives for their retirements. There are positives and negatives. I mean, the challenge with pension benefits in general is that they are a fairly blunt instrument, because this is what applies to people who are high income earners as well as to low income earners. And so often when we look at, say, removing a limit like the marriage after 60 limitation that's in the plan, the biggest beneficiaries of this are going to be the high income earners. This is not a method necessarily of targeting any specific subpopulation. So the question is, what are we aiming to do? And if it's to, say, help ensure that low-income survivors are provided for in retirement, there's a great deal of costs that are not going to be, and funds that are not going to be allocated to these members. It's a very small component.
Merci, Monsieur Desilets.
Thank you, Mr. Desilets. And I would like to pass the mic to Mrs. Rachel Blaney for the next 2 minutes and a half.
So if I could come to ask some questions of Ms. Garrett Baird. I guess the first two actually are basically yes or no questions. You have talked in your in answering questions about survivor supports outside of the pension that people who are married after 60 could possibly be able to use after their partner passes. I'm just wondering if you could submit to the committee how much of that money is flowing to that particular group. Like you were talking about hundreds of thousands of people, and like how much money, what program, and how many people is it impacting that are people that are survivors who have no access to the pension? Could you get us that information?
I'm able to provide you with what we know, which is we're providing the income.
So do you know, do you calculate at all who accesses those programs that are not receiving the survivor's benefit?
If you're referring to the optional survivor benefit, we
I'm
don't.
not going to ask you that question because you don't want to understand it. Could you provide us the stats? So Stats Canada did all of that assessment, but there was no analysis. Could you provide the committee with the analysis of Stats Canada information to this committee?
Yes, what we found from our analysis.
So you're going to submit that to us? That's perfect, if you could do that. So now around the Veteran Survivors Fund, this does apply only to veterans. It doesn't apply to RCMP veterans, which is concerning to me. So I know that none of the money has moved of the 150 million. Does this assessment that you're going to share with committee talk about how it's going to be moved and when it's going to be moved? And the next part of that is is the department doing around the RCMP veterans?
The information that I have articulated today and that I will be sharing with you is what we have learned from Statistics Canada in terms of the characteristics of this population, which we are using to determine what is the way forward for the Veteran Survivor Fund. Budget 2019 provided the funding for veterans of the Canadian Armed Forces. We are aware of that the same clause applies to the RCMP Superannuation Act, but our work has been focused on Canadian Armed Forces veterans per the Budget 2019 commitment.
Okay, so there is no commitment to RCMP veterans. That's really helpful. So what I will do is I will actually write you my question, the initial question that I asked more specifically, hoping that you understand it then. And if you could receive that and get that information back to the committee, or let us know if you can't, that would be extremely helpful. That's my time. Thank you so much, Chair.
Exactly. You're welcome. Okay, now I'd like to invite Mr. Fraser-Tolmie for 5 minutes, please. It's Mr. Tolmie there. Or maybe I can invite Mrs. Wagenthal for 5 minutes.
What, did we lose my friend?
Maybe, I don't know.
Okay, well, I don't know where to go with this anymore, quite frankly. I think we've learned a great deal today, but I would be pleased. Oh, sorry, I think I'm getting a message. I would be pleased. Oh, I'm sorry. What they're saying, Chair, is they're wondering, did you not agree that we would be taking a break at this point in time?
No.
Perhaps there's some people who needed a quick.
Yeah. Okay. But I was saying that after this round, you get 5 minutes, and after that, we have Darrell Sanson. So I will put that on the table to ask members if they want to stop. Yes.
Understood.
Okay. No
I think we should take into account these people who have come to spend this afternoon with us, and to keep them sharp as well, to have the opportunity for a bit of a stretch break here. No, seriously, I am serious.
Yes, great. No, okay.
All right.
Good.
Thank you. Okay, so that being said, I think we've gotten a lot of clarity on what is and isn't at this point in time. I am very concerned about another promise in 2019 of 150 million, that it was supposed to kind of appease this whole concern about survivors receiving a portion of their loved one's pension when they pass away, and that none of those funds have gone out yet. To put that money forward when you aren't ready is a trademark of this government, where they make announcement after announcement, even with COVID, and nothing has been established or in place yet. So I would ask those of you that are engaged on that particular issue, if you could please, even now, maybe having had a little bit more time, Ms. Garrett Baird, explain to us where that process is at, and when and what we can expect to come out of that, in light of the fact that it appears to me that there is not a will or perhaps an ability at this point in time to come forward and meet the desire of our veterans and their spouses, as was outlined in the 2015 mandate letter.
Perfect. So,
thanks.
Budget 2019 provided $150 million to develop a Veteran Survivors Fund. That fund, to be clear, will not, and there has been, it is not intended. Can I just interrupt you
there? Sorry, because that's an important key. You say to develop a fund. So do you mean to create the fund? That money was not meant to actually go out to veteran survivors, but to figure out what that program would actually be? That's what that money was for?
No, the $150 million was targeted for survivors. It is not to develop the fund. As I mentioned at the outset, the research that we have undertaken, we have done within our own operating funding. We have not used that $150 million because that is targeted for survivors. So I want to reiterate that the fund is not a change to the Marriage After 60 clause in the Canadian Forces Superannuation Act. The focus would be on developing a fund for individuals that may be impacted by the clause. Given this is not an issue where there has been dragging of feet, we had no information really to understand what the needs of this population were, how many were a part of it, so we could actually determine how we would attribute this, what their actual needs were, because without any kind of information, we would be creating a very ill-informed fund that would not meet the needs of individuals.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. I do appreciate that. That is what we need to hear, because that kind of confirms what I am saying here, I guess. So what we're doing then is what I see has been happening for a very long time in Veterans Affairs, is that we try to create something else to deal with the problem rather than to streamline and make things simpler for our veterans as far as how those needs can be met. So can you give us just a sense, and I appreciate what you're saying, because you're starting at ground zero really with this whole issue as far as having any kind of ability. I'm sorry, Dr. Lee, I didn't mean ground zero, because there's been an effort made to do something on that file. But realistically, how long do you think it will take to create this program, and how much has the department spent within itself at this point in time on trying to do this? Like just to date.
So the department has been focused on the qualitative and quantitative research to inform what we're doing, and that is what we are looking at right now, is what's the way forward for the Veteran Survivor Fund, taking into consideration other supports that the department is providing to survivors, including monthly disability pensions, income replacement benefit, VAC assistance line, Veterans Independence Program. But yet we are aware of this issue, and we are very committed to this issue, because otherwise the discussion today around Dr. Lee's research and the work that we undertook with Statistics Canada would not have been done. That demonstrates the commitment that we have here and the seriousness of it. The pandemic has
I have just
impacted
30
it.
seconds maybe left. I'd like to ask one more question.
10 seconds.
10 seconds.
Yeah,
Okay.
only. Yes.
So very quickly, my question would be, and now it's leaving my brain. Would this mean that some other benefits would be rolled into it or disappear in the creation of this program?
We are not looking at getting rid of any benefits. The focus here is on what is the needs of this population, taking into consideration, what was stated in Budget 2019. But the focus is taking the research that we have received and looking at that to determine where are the needs and what does this population need, and that's helping us inform the way forward for the Veteran Survivor Fund.
Thank you, Mrs. Garrett Bird. And to conclude this round, I'd like to invite MP Darrell Sanson for 5 minutes.
Monsieur le Président,
Mr. Chair, my hand is up. Can I say something before we move on? Yes, Mr. Lauzon. I don't want to take Mr. Sampson's time. Indeed, I think we've done 3 good rounds with our witnesses. There were many questions. We're finishing the 3rd round, but I would like to suggest something since we are at the very end of the study. I'd like to suggest that we finish with Darrell Sampson and finish for today. I'm proposing that to the committee members if they would like to finish after Mr. Sampson's intervention. No, I disagree.
Voilà. Mais ce que moi, personnellement, je voulais faire, monsieur.
What I wanted to do, Mr. Lauzon, is after after the 5 minutes, for the witnesses, I wanted to invite you to take a break of 5 to 10 minutes and to come back in order to finish the questions for 25 minutes, for a 25-minute round. That's okay by me. Excellent, thank you. So let's finish this 5-minute round with the Howard Sampson, and then we will take a 10-minute break to come back to our final round. And I hope that that's okay for our witnesses as well. And thank you for your collaboration. So Mr. Darrell Sampson, the floor is yours for 5 minutes.
Darrell Sanson, please open. Darrell, we can't hear you. Okay, go ahead now. Okay, vas-y.
Thank you. I guess I'd like to begin by stating that I don't think we should be playing political games or using comments about this government making promises. I mean, we lived through 205 to 215 with major cuts to veterans and Canadian Armed Forces from the Conservative. We didn't talk about that, but maybe we should have. When she's saying, the last speaker saying that we made some promises, and the Conservative government was in power since 205, 215 and didn't do anything on the Survivor Fund for 60 and over. So let's just focus on getting this job done. I'm glad that the discussion, I want to thank all members that are here today, and I want to thank Mrs. Blaney for bringing the topic up, the study up. I think this is very important, and there's been lots of discussions around that. I guess I'd like to begin by asking, again, maybe you can identify, but has the Treasury Board or the national defense or veteran affairs, how much are we hearing questions around veterans pension after 60 survivor fund? Are we getting calls? Is this something that's being asked of us or asked of your responsibilities? I guess I'll start with Crabtree and see if you can just, are you having some requests or questions around that topic?
I would suggest that the Department of National Defense would be better prepared or suited to answer this simply because we don't deal with their membership directly.
That's good. Okay. Brigadier General Tasha?
Oui, merci. Merci, Chair. La seule temps qu'on reçoit des questions, c'est quand
The only time we receive questions is when we do CPAC, our advisory committee.
Will bring up at our CIFPAC the question about marriage after 60. But in terms of this being a question that is asked to the pension center, which is where these queries would be directed, I do not have numbers for you. I don't believe that they track that particular line of questioning. Over.
I thank you for that answer. It's just that many of the witnesses did share with us that they didn't hear about this during their session or retirement session, pre-retirement session, if you want, and most of them found out after. Can you confirm that this is being shared with members prior to their retirement, and to what extent? And I got the feedback that most of them were not aware.
So, Mr. Chair, thank you for the question. So in terms of the information that we communicate to our members do have available via the pension website, which is managed by the Pension Center, PSPC, information about the pension. That pension information is set up in terms of if they served before 2007, if they served after 2007, are they married? Is this about a deceased? So the information is organized in a way to permit them to get to an answer. There is, in the frequently asked questions, because I did have it verified, that in fact there is a link there with respect to a question about marriage after 60. But that's only one part of the information that members will get. There are Second Career Assistance Network briefings that are done about pensions where this would be an issue that is raised. There is information about pensions in the transition guide that now that we have the Canadian Armed Forces Transition Group that is provided to members as well. There has been a bulletin that has been distributed.
Okay, thank you. It's just that I wanted to share that because a lot of them were saying that that was an issue. Mr. Crabtree, you indicated that the fund, it's based on the pooling of risk and et cetera, et cetera. Is there other funds where the survivor does receive the money that they put aside? Like you indicated that here in this case it doesn't, but are there funds that you're aware of that does pay back the monies that were invested if the survivor passed before?
I mean, I maybe defer a little bit to our colleagues at Veterans, but if you're speaking generally to pension plans across Canada, I mean, there are different forms of pension which provide different types of guarantees in terms of benefit payouts, both for members and survivors. They're more or less consistent with what the public sector plans offer, though, but there are different forms that provide, as I said, some forms of guarantees, but often those guarantees come in the form, much like our optional survivor benefit, of a reduced payout initially.
I know my time is up, but you said Quebec and the municipal in Ontario, are they getting the 100% that they put in, or?
In 10 seconds, please.
No, it's also a pooled risk set up there. It's always a trade-off. It's always a risk pooling, and the payouts are dependent on how long people live, and it's very individually dependent.
Okay. Thank you.
Merci, Monsieur Crabtree. Écoutez, mesdames, messieurs.
Thank you, Mr. Crabtree. As we agreed, ladies and gentlemen, we will take a 10-minute break and then come back with the last round of questions. We will start with Mr. Frank Caputo. It's exactly 3:11. At 3:21, Mr. Caputo will have his mic open to commence the last round, so I'm suspending the session for 10 minutes to take a break. The session. the meeting again. I invite Mr. Frank Caputo to take the floor. 5 minutes.
Minutes here, Mr. Chair. I'm going to finish up with Mr. Crabtree. I see MP Blaney is jumping up and down, but I don't know what she could possibly be trying to say to me. So Mr. Crabtree, where I left off, and if I really want to make sure I understand this, because this has been a huge issue. I'm going to summarize what I perceive your message and your evidence to be, and then if you could please confirm whether I got it right or not. If I have it right, when a veteran contributes on behalf of their spouse, or really what we should say, when a veteran and their spouse contribute, because it's the two of them. Let's say when they contribute that $2,000 a month for a total of $96,000 over the course of 4 years. If I understand it correctly, that $96,000 is essentially, and forgive my language, but it's almost like hedging a bet, if you will, saying in the event I perish, that $96,000 will go to pay me. Would it be $2,000 a month for the rest of my life? Is that accurate, or however much is to be paid?
It's half of what the survivor benefit is. I believe it's 1% instead of the 2%. So it's half.
So it'd be $1,000 a month
in that example.
Yeah. So in that example, you're paying $4,000 a year, or pardon me, you're paying $2,000 a month in order to potentially get $1,000 a month for the rest of your life in the event the veteran perishes. Do I have that right? First.
Correct. And I'll add precision, which is it's half of their unreduced pension as well. It's because often plans, depending early retirement, CPP, et cetera, it can reduce. So it's probably more than half, but anyways, we'll just, for simplicity, half, and that you've got it right.
I have enough trouble with numbers, so yeah, let's just leave it at that. And somebody actuarially has come up with and said, if I understand it correctly, again, that in order to not bankrupt the pension fund, this is the way it has to be. Is that right?
Well, again, these are members' funds, so all members contribute in a risk pool together. And so someone is actuarially calculating what the cost is projected to be for the plan on average. And so they're trying to offset this to be neutral to the plan.
So theoretically, somebody, as MP Wagenthal said, it may be wiser to take that $2,000 a month and invest it, say, at 6 or 7%. And at the end of the day, they have their principal plus that. That's a decision they ultimately have to make, but they're guaranteed in that case to not lose any money. They just might not get anything in the event that the veteran passes first.
I mean, it's effectively a fair statement. I mean, again, when we're looking at this as an actuarial calculation, they're trying to assume very much what this will cost the plan, and that's kind of looking at another alternative with a set of assumptions about what you could get as a return for these funds, et cetera. But yes, I mean, it's a defined benefit versus kind of defined contribution. You're basically trying to lock in a set amount of money here if you're going to keep them aside and not reduce your benefit through an optional survivor benefit. But if the survivor goes on to live 15 years and say longer than what was anticipated in this calculation, they in theory could make much more money under the optional survivor benefit than had they put this money aside. Or if they put the money aside and lose money in the markets. It's as you said, there's a bit of an uncertainty here. It's maybe not gambling exactly, but it's uncertain. Yeah.
Okay, so I'll take it one step further then, again, just so I'm clear. Let's say you have a veteran and their spouse, they decide to put in the 50% at $2,000, and that veteran passes after 6 months, so only $12,000 has been contributed. Would it stand to follow then that the surviving spouse would then receive, let's say we call it $1,000, that they would receive that $1,000 for the rest of their lives?
That's correct. Again, it depends on what the member opted for, that 30, 40, or 50%, but assuming it's 50%, it's what they would get for the rest of their lives, yes.
So if, again, to summarize then, your point, if I have it correctly, is there are risks in everything, because in this case, let's say you take 50% of your pension and you die after 6 months, it was the greatest investment you could have made because you paid $12,000 and then you got $1,000 a month as the survivor for the next 30 years. The flip side of it is if you pay into that for 25 years, let's say you start at 65 and the person lives to 90, they see zero of that. So in that case, it's the worst investment they really could have made because they've put money aside and seen, no interest, no return on that. Do I have a fair summary there?
It's accurate, but I will also point out that is the same for the entirety of all defined benefit pension plans. Like, I could pay in as a member for my entire life. I could have a spouse. We both pass away within a few years of my retirement. I would have paid in hundreds of thousands of dollars and received nothing in return. It is the formula and the nature.
I see my time is done. Sorry, MP Blaney.
Exactly. No. Thank you, Mr. Caputo. And j'aimerais inviter.
I'd like to invite Mr. Stéphane Lauzon to take the mic for 5 minutes. Members can also share their time. Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's a pleasure to participate once again and to ask questions on this issue. I'd like to continue in the same line of thinking what I had spoken to Mrs. Garrett-Baird about. The question you asked is linked to your responsibilities, the ones that you had related to the new pension plan. With the current model that we have, with the pension and what we know today, and the fact that we have brought together all three pension funds to make one pension fund, what are the advantages for veterans with this pension model? Can you tell us a bit about some of the advantages?
Thank you. So if you're referring to the Pension Act, the new Veterans Charter, and Pension for Life, what the advantages are of Pension for Life is that and the new Veterans Charter, which was the precursor to Pension for Life, is we now have a suite of benefits and services that can be provided to veterans and their families, to include areas such as rehabilitation, financial support, whether it's the income replacement benefit, the Canadian Forces Income Support Benefit. Those are areas that we did not have pre-2006. We only had the monthly disability pension and supports such as the attendance allowance and exceptional incapacity allowance for veterans that had very, very serious injuries. So what we were able to do is step back and realize that model was not enough for our modern day veterans, that they were in need of rehabilitation, that they were in need of support like career transition services, and then move forward to 2019 when we identified that there were gaps in education and training. So we launched the education and training benefit. We also put in place support such as the caregiver recognition benefit for family members or caregivers of the most seriously disabled veterans to ensure that they're getting what they need. So that whole suite of benefits encompassed by a very strong case management system and other supports such as the VAC assistance line. We are working with our Canadian Armed Forces colleagues on the Veteran Family Program to ensure that there's a seamless transition once a member's release and come over to VAC for support. And we're always looking at ensuring that our members, the Canadian Armed Forces members, veterans and their families are getting the supports and services that they need. And as mentioned, where we've identified gaps in areas such as education and training and the caregiver recognition benefit, those supports have been put in place. And even if we step back again and look at the most since 2016, there's been over $11 billion for veterans provided through our budgets. And then most recently in budget 2022, there was new additional funding there of over $201 million to continue to reduce wait times and address veterans homelessness. So we continue to evolve to ensure that our programming is supporting the needs of those that we serve, which is the most important thing, and that is their well-being and their health.
Merci beaucoup. Est-ce que vous prenez aussi dans...
Thank you. In the context of veterans, do you also consider all of the programs that are there to help veterans? We did the analysis on the programs that we have, for example, psychological help, support for families, support for members of the family who are spouses of the veteran, and also all the rehabilitation therapies. Have you considered all the costs that all of these programs have for the veteran?
Yeah, so when we're developing these programs and services, there is costing done along with a forecasting of how many veterans and family members we know that will benefit from it. So for example, in budget 2021, a new mental health benefit was announced, which launched on April 1st, 2022, and that is targeted to veterans that are applying for disability benefits related to a mental health condition such as PTSD, anxiety, and depressive disorders. And that benefit, there was $140 million put forward for that benefit over 5 years, and then ongoing support. And it is in place to ensure that individuals or veterans coming forward with mental health conditions can access treatment immediately upon application while they're waiting for their disability benefit to be processed. And I see that my time is up.
Exactly. Merci, Monsieur Lauzon, c'est terminé.
Thank you, Mr. Lauzon. Your turn is over. So I'd like to invite Mr. Desilets for 2.5 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. My first question is for Mr. Lee. I have a lot of respect for the work you do at the University of British Columbia. You are a PhD. You have done very important work in the past. My preoccupation is as follows. The sample is very small. Nothing happened as you hoped it had. That was not your fault because people did not answer, for example. And it's a big shame. As an academic, do you think that your study passes through this very demanding spectrum of, or perspective of research?
Monsieur Lee?
Thank you for your questions for that. I would say that the small sample size is kind of like is the reality for that. But I think the quality of the conversations we have with the veterans and the survivor for that, I think is kind of like really cover up some of the grants we would like to kind of like going back to identifying the list and what would be the financial well-beings for that. I'm a qualitative researcher trained and then so I have anthropology backgrounds as well for that, and smaller sample size for that sometimes it is kind of like it can kind of trade off with the quality of the information we are getting for that. I think we captured quite a lot of the voices, and of course like are we going to be saturated in some ways for that, and then in terms of like the themes, and I can see that it's like the more samples would be good and more time frame spending with the victims and the survivor would be helpful for that. But having said that, just like we did the very, very best in the pandemic time for that to kind of like get the voices and present to you. And then I would say we did pass by as a qualitative researcher here.
Mais ça, je fait conscient, là, Monsieur Lee.
I'm totally conscious of that, and I don't want to question your work. That's not the idea. It's rather the result. Since it's there, do you believe or not that we have to take consideration of it in order to inject millions of dollars into the program?
very good questions, but I think I share in my report and my recommendations here for that. And that recommendations or that insight is from the veterans I talked to, from the survivor I talked to for that. I leave it to the standing committee to make the decisions. As a researcher, I think I just not do a fair job in reporting the voices I get. Colette. Yeah. But thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lee. Thank you, Mr. Desilets. And I'd like to invite Miss Rachel Blaney. 2 minutes and a half, please. Go ahead.
Thank you so much. And if I could ask a question through you, Chair, of Ms. Tattersall. I guess my question is she aware that REGS, another committee in this place, has requested the minister attend to explain the government's intentions regarding eliminating this clause after 60? That's the question one. And the second one is, has she been called on to provide briefing notes about this clause to anyone in national defense, and if so, who?
So to your, Mr. Chair, to the first question, no, I am not aware of an appearance before Minister Anand of any other committee, but then I don't honestly tend to go through all of the information of the various committee appearances on a daily basis. Mr. Chair, to the second question, if I have prepared any briefing notes, I think there may have been a briefing note that was passed to me to outline the marriage after 60 as to what the challenges are. That was approximately 3.5 years ago. Thank you.
Thank you. That's extremely helpful. I'm wondering if I can come now to Mr. Crabtree. I know that the Treasury Board sometimes provides recommendations. So I'm just wondering, does the Treasury Board have a policy specifically on this clause? Does the Treasury Board support the elimination of the clause? And if they do, why or why not?
Thank you for the question, Chair. Essentially right now, the current government has yet to respond in Parliament to Bill C-221. And as such, I wouldn't be able to comment on the government's position in this respect. That being said, I understand that similar private members' bill and petitions have been introduced in previous parliaments that may be part of the public record. So that may give you an indication. That being said, at the same time, we can't confirm whether the government's position would be the same as previous responses.
Okay, thank you. And if I could just come back to Ms. Garrett Baird, could I just get clarity if VAC has responsibility to our CMP veterans? Because I am very clear that that is the case, but I'm just wanting to clarify that if there's a misunderstanding that I'm having.
The department has a memorandum of understanding with the RCMP to administer disability pensions on their behalf under the RCMP Superannuation Act. So we do provide that support. The RCMP are not eligible for some of the other supports I mentioned today, such as the income replacement benefit and areas like that, because that is outside of the department's mandate. What we do is support those RCMP members who have service-related injuries or illnesses that come forward for disability pensions.
Merci beaucoup. J'aimerais inviter.
Thank you. I would like to invite Mrs. Morgenthau for the next 5 minutes. Or Mrs. Wagenthal, rather. Maybe it's Mr. Tolmie. It's Mrs. Wagenthal. We are resuming the meeting, and Mrs.
To complete your intervention, and after that we'll go to Sean Casey. Please go ahead, Mrs. Garrett Bird.
Perfect. So the study that we worked on with Statistics Canada, the focus there was on living survivors of a deceased veteran who was in receipt of a CAF pension before death and who married on or after the veteran's 60th birthday. And what we wanted was the study was basically the number of survivors who were not receiving any income from that CAF pension. So as I noted, we were able to get the number of veterans right back to 1938 with a superannuation pension, survivors with a CAF pension, and survivors without a CAF pension. And so thank you.
Thank you so much. And to close this round, I'd like to invite MP Sean Casey for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll be sharing my time with MP Valdez. Just want to pick up where Ms. Garrett Baird left off. Ms. Garrett Baird, I think you indicated now a couple of times that the research that had been done indicated that there were 4,500 survivors who would be receiving, if the clause was eliminated, would be receiving a pension. Do I have that right, or is it simply 4,500 who have married after 60?
No, it's 4,500 survivors who did not receive a pension.
And so if the clause was to be eliminated today, the government of Canada would then be required to pay a survivor's pension to those 4,500 people. Is that right?
I would have to defer to my colleague at National Defence, but based on our research that was done, as of the end date on the research, it was 4,490 survivors.
Okay, I see Mr. Crabtree turned his mic on, but before I go to him, I want to point out, and maybe you can incorporate this in your answer, Mr. Crabtree, if you're inclined to participate in this discussion. When we had Statistics Canada in front of us, they told us that the number who married after 60 presently stands at between 4,000 and 6,000, and the number who have had their spouses deceased is between 2,000 and 4,000. So the number that we're getting from Ms. Baird is 4,500. The number that we got from Stats Canada as of 2018 was between 2,000 and 4,000. Did you have something you wanted to contribute?
I was just going to add that when we talk about if the marriage after 60 clause was removed, when we've talked about costing and that cost earlier on, it really has only been in reference to those who are still contributing. There's always that question as to how do we treat those who have already retired from or where members have already deceased. So that is not included in the costing, and nor is it necessarily going to be included or captured if the marriage after 60 clause were to be removed. There would have to be specific consideration for how to treat those who have already retired and those who have already passed. So just to say it was not implicit.
Thank you, sir. I cede the remainder of my time to Ms. Valdez.
Go ahead, MP Richie Valdez, please.
Thank you, Chair. My questions are for Mr. Lee. I know you've done this extensive research, and I really appreciate everything you've done for that. But what I wanted to know, which I haven't heard yet, is can you share what the participants mentioned about the stigma they faced entering a marriage after 60, or did a lot of them face stigma for entering these relationships?
I'd say most of the stigmas is entering or after they enter the relationship, but that especially is like they have some kind of major age differences. That means like 10 plus year. So they're being labeled and gold diggers for that. But the other is pretty much like similar age for that. I think I also see some pattern between like the veterans couples or the survivor for that. They're also serving in the army too, or they are stay home, kind of like taking care of the family for that. I can definitely see that would be some very general pattern. So being unemployed for pretty much like 30, 40 years for that, and they are also carrying another stigma. It's not just like the gold digger kind of a stigmas for that. So I think definitely that would be some different labels or stigmas surrounding this population. So thank you for the questions. Yep.
No problem. The other thing too is more around like psychological support. have they asked for any type of resources that we can provide them? Anything that we can help them in any way from that perspective?
Well, I think most of the stress is really, again, I mentioned earlier that they got double hit, and then so they got some financial struggle, but at the same time, they also lost their spouse. So I think having said that, just like that would be some emotional support social workers should kind of like jump in to help them to really kind of help them go through that challenging moments for that. And the loss of socialization because of the financial difficulties. And also, I remember just like quickly quote, and when you're hearing a lady in her 70s tells you, I have to stop going to the coffee shop because $7 per coffee is too expensive. And then, so I think I conclude my statement here. Thank you.
Thank you. And I think I'm up for time. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you so much. You exactly, effectivement, le temps est...
Indeed, our time is up. So this round of questioning is over. And I really want to thank all of the witnesses that participated today. It has been the longest meeting that we've had with all of the witnesses. It will be very, very useful for us for the report. So in the name of all the members of the committee and in my name, I would like to thank you all.
Sorry to interrupt you. I know you're thanking everyone.
Blenay, go ahead. Yes.
Thank you so much. I'm just wondering, I heard several committee members today talk about the Quebec provincial pensions process. I'm just wondering if we could direct the analyst to be able to reach out and get more information, just so that when the report is written, he has access. We are hearing a lot of anecdotal information, which I really value, but I think it's important that we actually get that information. I don't think we have a lot more time within our time here. So I'm just wondering if that's okay with you, Chair, that we ask if the analyst could retrieve that information directly from the source so that the report encaptures that. Thank you. Sorry for interrupting.
No, that's
thank you to all the witnesses.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, while we're adding things on to our body of work, I know that we didn't cover off what the degree of uptake was on the optional survivor's benefit, although it appeared that one of the witnesses wanted to answer that. So I think that will be helpful too.
Okay, so I'm gonna, right after this meeting, I'm gonna talk to the clerk and the analyst also to see, because it's important to have a full report. I agree with you. Okay, donc je disais donc.
As I was saying, yes, Mr. Desilliers. Maybe one last question. We asked Mrs. Garrett Baird if we could have an analysis. I heard the answers, but I was validating with some colleagues, and I don't know if I really understood it, that we will indeed receive an analysis from Stats Canada. Unless somebody can answer, do we have an official yes? From my point of view, I listened to the conversation, and I don't have an official yes or no. So I don't want to refer to the witnesses again. So maybe the clerk and the analyst could listen to the tape. So with that, dear witnesses and members of the committee, thank you once again. And I would like to name you before leaving. We had from the Canadian Institute for Military and Veteran Health Research, Dr. Eric Ping Hong Lee, Associate Professor at the University of British Columbia. We had from the Department of National Defense, Brigadier General Virginia Tattersall, Director General Compensation and Benefits. From the Department of Veterans Affairs, Crystal Garrett Baird, Director General for Policy and Research, and from the Treasury Board Secretariat, Nadine Labrie, Senior Director, Pensions and Benefits, as well as Simon Crabtree, Executive Director, Pensions and Benefits. So once again, thank you very much for having participated to this meeting and for having answered the members' questions. And before adjourning the meeting, I'd like to let the members know that starting June 3rd for the following meetings, we will be studying the reports of the projects that we've started on service dogs, and time permitting, on the desecration of monuments erected in honor of veterans. I would also like to inform the members of the committee that Major Brendan Actuleta was going to show up, but he has declined the invitation, and so we will move on to the report study on the 10th and the 17th of June. So I would like to know if we can adjourn the meeting. If there are no objections, then once again, I would like to thank the technical crew, the interpreters, the analysts and clerk who were here with us today, and have a good long weekend. The meeting is adjourned. Thank you and have a wonderful day.